Well, the war between Hamas and Israel is changing political dynamics here in the U.S., as well as how people's thoughts are on how the Biden administration is handling this right now. That, along with a few other things, like when you look at the labor movement, you look at the economy, and you look at abortion still as an issue that many people are talking about, that is all going to be playing into the election next year. And how Michigan will play into this, we still hold big sway when it comes to the presidential election. So let's bring in pollster Richard Zuba. He is the founder of the Glenn Gariff Group and someone that I love to talk to after every election night. It's so great to see you, Richard.
Good to be here.
All right, so let's go ahead and break it down, kind of hyper-local. When we woke up on Wednesday morning, just looking here specifically at Michigan, what were some of the results that made you think that this is going to be a very interesting cycle in 24?
Well, as I looked around what was happening on election night, what struck me was that abortion was still an issue. It still resonated with voters across the country. And I think that's something that we're going to continue to see up until the next election. Here in Michigan specifically, I think the thing that caught my attention was that the state house is no longer going to be under Democratic control, at least for a very short time, because we had two Democratic state house members elected as mayors, both of Warren and Westland. And, you know, that throws a little chaos into the world of Lansing.
It does. Let's go ahead and take a look at the themes, though, for 24. When you talk about abortion and some of the specific issues, let's talk about our U.S. Senate seat that is going to be opened here in Michigan. On the Republican side, Peter Meijer jumping into the race last week, and then there with Mike Rogers. What are you making of that as going forward?
Well, you know, multi-candidate fields have a way of being wacky. You know, this is something we always see where we start to see multiple candidates. You know, Pete Meijer jumped into this race this week, and I've said Donald Trump went to extraordinary measures to make sure Pete Meijer did not get reelected to Congress. I fail to believe that Pete Meijer is going to be Donald Trump's choice for the U.S. Senate. And I think we have to step back and look at what happened in 18, 20, 22. Donald Trump has an inordinate sway with the Republican primary vote in selecting who the party's nominees are going to be. And I don't see any change on that in terms of who, you know, Donald Trump weighing in, selecting who he believes the nominee should be. It's not going to be Pete Meijer, frankly. And I think, you know, it's a question whether it would be Mike Rogers. So that's going to be a fascinating dynamic in that race.
Let's go ahead and expand the lens. If you are Republicans and you are Democrats at the national level and you're looking at Michigan right now, specifically the labor movement, and if you're also looking at sentiment among the Jewish community and the Muslim community here in Michigan about the way the Biden administration is handling what is happening between Israel and Hamas right now, how big of a factor do you think that that's going to play in some decision making in the presidential race? And what would you say to either of these camps of what they need to know about Michigan in 24?
Well, first and foremost is voters in Michigan continue to believe the economy is in a horrible situation. There is deep pessimism across the spectrum on the economy, and it's due to inflation. When we ask these questions about why specifically people are so pessimistic, it comes down to inflation and specifically food costs. That's the first thing people talk about are the costs of their groceries going up. And it's going to play out across this presidential race. The one thing I will say, you know, Democrats had a really good night nationally yet again on Tuesday night, but Joe Biden's numbers are singularly bad. They stand out as they are bad numbers for any incumbent office holder. And I think Joe Biden has problems within his own party, particularly with voters under 40 that are Democratic. Essential piece of the Democratic coalition, Joe Biden has a real problem with that. On the flip side, you have Donald Trump as the nominee on the Republican side, and we don't know what's going to happen should these court cases turn against him. We don't know what the voters are going to do because we've never been here. So we have great uncertainty in the presidential race.
Let me ask you how difficult that makes your job, because now you are going to try to find these undecideds. And I'm so glad that you mentioned Joe Biden's numbers, because we did have that New York Times poll that came out earlier this week showing Donald Trump having a lead in 5 out of 6 swing states, including here in Michigan. But you've got to try to find those undecideds, which are still 12, 13%. How do you go about doing that as a pollster, Richard?
Well, they're going to tell us. We pull these random samples and we have a very good sense of what we would expect it to look like. But at the same time, these independent voters aren't sure where they're going to go yet. And, they're absolutely holding back on Joe Biden, but they haven't committed to Donald Trump yet. Donald Trump is going to get the number he's always gotten in Michigan. The question becomes, does Joe Biden match him and exceed him? Or is there a significant part of that Democratic coalition, and I'm thinking specifically young voters, do they hang back? Do they not engage? Do they choose a third party? We saw today that Jill Stein is going to pursue the Green Party nomination. Well, that's a name that should haunt a lot of Democrats. So where do those young voters go, and what do they do? Do they engage with Joe Biden, or do they walk away? That's going to decide a lot of the questions.
It's going to be interesting, and also that Senator Joe Manchin is not going to be running as well, and he's maybe looking at the No Labels Party, too. There's going to be a lot to talk about, and you're going to be with me a lot, I think, in this next year. Richard Zuba, thanks so much for joining me. It's great to see you.
Good to see you.